Hello and welcome back to SOCH111 History of Healing, Session 2, and this is the second part in our two-part lecture. So as we travel through the history of healing, we're going to see many different concepts of health and disease and healing. So today we're going to take a brief survey of these terms, just really to introduce the kind of core concepts so that we can sort of set the stage for further exploration of these terms as we move throughout the next coming weeks. So we're going to start with this World Health Organization definition of health, and just take a read through it and just consider to yourself whether or not this is a holistic definition of health or whether it's a perhaps reductionist definition of health. So health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And hopefully you've come to the realization that it is indeed quite a holistic definition of health, and it's good to see that in fact it's been in place since 1948 and it hasn't been altered since then. So we're going to look at a couple of different more modern definitions of health that come from the complementary medicine perspective. And we're going to start with the definition of health put together by the German nature cure practitioner Lindlar. So Lindlar wrote the seminal naturopathic medicine philosophy and theory text Nature Cure in around about 1914, and so he said, normal and harmonious vibration of the elements and forces composing the human entity on the physical, mental, moral and spiritual planes of being, in conformity with the constructive principle of nature applied to individual life, is what health is. Health is determined by many factors, and we can see here that this is certainly a deeply holistic view of the many different factors that go into somebody being healthy. So this is the early naturopathic definition of health. And here's another definition. In the healthy condition of man, the spiritual vital force, or autocracy, the dynamis that animates the material body, or the organism, rules with unbounded sway and retains all the parts of the organism in admirable harmonious vital operation as regards both sensations and functions, so that our indwelling, reason-gifted mind can freely employ this living, healthy instrument for the higher purpose of our existence. And this definition of health is in the Organon of Medicine, which was written by Samuel Hahnemann. And Hahnemann was very similar to Lindlar in that he was a trailblazer of complementary medicine in more modern times. They were both actually from Germany. Hahnemann was originally a Western-trained physician who became quite disenfranchised with the way that he saw medicine being practiced at the time, and often he saw that often it caused more harm than it did good, and as such he actually rejected the mainstream model of medicine, and in part it was because of this rejection that he then developed his own system of homeopathy. And so the Organon of Medicine was written in the early 1800s, and it really defined his understanding of this new model of medicine called homeopathy. So when you look at this definition, what sort of philosophy do you see? Do you see on the face of it that it is a holistic philosophy or a reductionist philosophy? If it is holistic, what parts are considered to contribute to the formation of the whole? And also consider, do you agree? Does this fit with what you think a holistic definition of health might be? So, what is disease? Well, definitions have changed over time with advancing technology, diagnostic techniques, laboratory testing, and the general shift from holistic to reductionist medical philosophies. And really, the shift has been from the subjective experience of what the patient experiences of their condition to the objective perspective, which is what the doctor can see or measure. And if we take a look at this graphic here, we see that this would be considered a holistic understanding of disease. So disease is something that can arise when a number of factors happen together simultaneously. So if there is an environment that's conducive to the development of that disease, if there is a host or a person who is in some sort of state that allows for that disease to develop, and if there's some sort of pathogenic factor present in the environment or in the person, when all these things happen together, these are the conditions that allow disease to develop. So if we focus solely on the Western view of disease over time, which is really only a fraction of of the scope of what we might actually be able to consider, we find that there are two major camps of thought about what disease is, and these are listed here: the ontological thinking and then the physiological thinking. So the tension created by these two camps is that it's very useful to name and classify diseases from a diagnostic and treatment perspective, and perhaps it's easier to conceptualize the treatment of disease in this way. But the reality is that each disease is had by an individual person. It has its unique features in that individual. And this is one of the reasons why prescription drugs tend to work on some people and not other people, or why certain herbs tend to have one particular effect in one person and somewhat different of an effect in another person. The unique physiological path that a disease follows is in an individual person is generally determined by that person's unique physiology, their biochemistry, their anatomy, and we're certainly not all the same in these regards, as well as things like their genetic predispositions, their diet, their lifestyle, stress factors, chemicals in their environment, so environmental factors, and things like this. So some refer to this as the terrain of the patient, and in holistic forms of medicine, the terrain is actually seen as being just as important as the named disease itself. For if the disease can be eliminated by drugs or by surgery, and the terrain or the conditions that allowed the disease to develop in the first place aren't also dealt with, then it's very likely that disease or something like it will develop once again. But this doesn't mean that the ontological view is not important or valuable, particularly if the disease is one that causes rapid degeneration, or is advanced, or is life-threatening. The ability to identify and classify such entities diagnostically in these cases is critical to saving the lives of many people. And it's because of the tension between these two different views on disease, and the values and the shortcomings of each, that we see the basic view shift repeatedly throughout history. And we're going to see examples of this, especially as we travel through European forms of medicine later on in the semester. Here we have a modern complementary discipline indicating that it may not be useful in the philosophy of that discipline to use the label disease, but instead to look at how the body is working to use its natural healing capacities to bring itself back to health. And the process of disturbance and recovery will involve symptoms. So just read over this quote, and then we're going to develop the idea of symptoms a little bit. Rather than viewing the ill patient as suffering from a disease, the naturopath views the ill person as functioning within a process of disturbance and recovery in the context of nature and natural systems. So what are symptoms really? Symptoms are signs that the body is attempting to bring itself back to health, for example a fever or inflammation, or warning signs of an underlying condition or disturbance. And we need to consider the idea that the symptoms are not the disease. So we can take headache as an example, and headache is often considered to be the symptom of disease, but in fact another way of looking at headache is seeing it as being a reflection of an underlying pattern of disharmony in the body, and a sign that something isn't working correctly. So treatment from a holistic perspective is really then focused on rectifying that pattern of disharmony, and many different systems will use different methods to bring that rectification about. And so once that pattern of disharmony has been taken care of and brought back in, the person's been brought back into a state of balance, then the conditions that allow that headache to develop are no longer present, and therefore the headache is also no longer present. Also, if we consider the notion of what's called the Herxheimer reaction, or commonly understood as the healing crisis, this is basically a process of detoxification that the body goes through at the beginning of a healing process. And so what happens is that stored toxins are released in the body, and they basically cause some sort of toxicity to be manifested in the body in the form of symptoms. And a common Herxheimer reaction symptom is headache. But is that then a symptom of disease, or is that a sign of healing? Disease is the process whereby the intelligent body reacts to disturbing elements. It employs such processes as inflammation and fever to help restore its health. So then, the question has to be asked, what is cure? And if we've understood that disease is conceptualized differently according to reductionist or holistic perspectives, we also need to think that cure might also be conceived of differently according to each philosophical perspective. And so I want to throw this question over to you to ponder, and to try and ponder from both of those perspectives, and once again to consider how this might occur, how cure might be affected within the different medical traditions that we cover through the semester. So just as we finish up, here's a final revision question, and it's really just asking you to write down your own personal definitions of health, disease or illness. And finally, if two systems of medicine have different philosophical views on the nature of symptoms, how might they treat a patient differently? Thank you.